start out with something like a bowl shape. And you want to leave that flange really, really thick. And the reason why is because then I can come in and I can push that down. And so I'm just basically going to take my measurement, make sure it's in, about halfway in between that flange on both sides. And then I just kind of support my thumb underneath and just push that clay down. And this is kind of where it gets kind of a pain in the butt because you have to kind of go back and forth. So that's a little bit too small. So again, if I had a ruler or something to measure, I can just come in.
You know exactly where it's going.
And I just pull out with one hand until I get it really close, and then let that be. So it's just an easy way to kind of keep track of how far that's going instead of having to go back and forth and back and forth. Just hold it. And we'll go about there. Then just come in and clean that up a little bit.
So you didn't do pottery in high school?
I had one ceramics class, and I think I made a really awful coil pot. Actually, no, I lied. I made one really awful coil pot and one really awful little small object. I still have the small object I made on the wheel. That was 15 years ago, maybe now? So I'm not going to save these ones that I'm going to throw. We'll save the ones that I'm going to trim later. But just to give you an idea of kind of what I'm looking for. Oh. Well, that would have fit. Anyway, I'll show you guys what I mean by the lids on these. So when I go to put that lid on top there, you can see how that does not fit. Basically, when I come back and trim that in, it'll fit nice and snug. And again, I don't have to worry about it being too small. So we'll finish this one up a little bit later. It's still a little bit on the wet side. All right. So my mug.
Do you want it under some air? If I put it in the other room under a heater? Or is it?
You know what? I think we'll be all right.
Okay.
I can go grab my fan.
Yeah, I think we'll be all right with that one.
Really? Okay.
Sneak my hand one time. A little bit more clay.
Did you weigh out your clay balls when you work?
When I make mugs and stuff, I usually do. Yeah, I'd say most of the time I do. And unless the only time I don't is the big jars. I never really set out the specific shape or size it's going to be when I'm making them. It's all kind of by the seat of my pants. So as I'm like, it looks like it's too narrow, then I just kind of modify it, pull it in a little bit more, or change that shape as I want to. Probably not the most efficient way to make pots, but for the big jars, since they're not really, I don't think anybody's going to call me up and say I want 100 big jars. I don't have to worry about that quite yet. The next one I'll make is this little bottle form here. I know some potters who actually sit down and the first thing they do is make 10 mugs or 5 mugs or something like that. I never do, because if I do, then I'll probably forget what I was going to make and completely space it off. So I just sit down, and if I'm struggling with it, I struggle with it. But I haven't really noticed too much as far as it helping me out. because my mugs are a little bit different than throwing the bigger, wider things. So on my bottles, I open them up to about that same thickness. I always leave a little bit extra thickness in the bottoms of like my taller, narrower pots. And the reason why is it kind of helps keep that weight down at the bottom, the center of gravity a little bit, so it doesn't quite knock over quite as easily. If you make it too light at the bottom, kind of like a bowling pin, it just goes plop.
But yet you trim and leave a wider pedestal like thing for your pots, right?
Yeah, I do, you'll notice on this one, when I start to trim this, I'll actually trim this in a little bit more here, and then leave all that clay down there, and just kind of leave that for the foot. So it creates a little bit of a separation.
Makes it stable, doesn't it?
Because I've had a lot of people comment, they're like, won't that get tipped over really easy? And believe it or not, they're pretty stable.
You were firing with wood. About how high did you fire?
Cone 12.
Okay.
About 2400,
Yeah.
right around there, 2380 I think it is. I think most importantly, when I was firing, it wasn't so much getting it to that particular temperature. I think it was more about how long I was holding it. Because I was holding it at 2250 for about 10 hours, and then the last 3 or 4 hours I would ramp it up and get everything to melt.
Now, why would you hold it there? For ash?
For a little bit of ash. At that point, it's tacky enough that it'll actually grab that ash a little bit more. If you hold it at lower temperatures, it kind of doesn't quite build up as much, so it just kind of grabs it and sticks it to the side of the piece. I don't know if that's 100% true. That's my theory. But I mean, at this point, like the clay I'm working with now, it's I work with a terracotta, and it's actually very easy to fire most of the time, unless the 3 big ones I did have to fire in a gas kiln, which is not the most fun, especially to cone 2, because most kilns are you can even them out a little bit easier later on in the firing, whereas earlier on in the firing you have to worry about having too much gas in the kiln, causing bloating and stuff like that, especially with all the organics that are in the terracotta, and especially with the amount of iron content that's in the terracotta. And I've been deciding on the bottles here, I've been debating about whether or not I should even worry about trying to throw them all in one piece. They don't necessarily have to. It'd probably be actually easier to throw like the bottom shape first, like just up to like the shoulder on this guy, and then come back in and later add the top part. But I don't know why. I probably spend too much time on the tops of these things because I don't throw them separately. But
do you ever set them aside and then throw later after it stiffens up a little bit?
No. I haven't even actually thought about doing that. As far as like the bottles and stuff like that, not really. And I think part of the reason is because I have to leave a little bit extra clay down at the bottom just so I can get them trimmed down to a little bit narrower base. Because the smaller your bottom is, and the bigger you want to, or the taller you want to go with it, if it gets too thin, it's just going to collapse on itself. So by leaving it a little bit thicker, I have a little bit more control with the final shaping of it. little bit thicker, I can actually push that in a little bit more. And then once I get sort of a shape, I'm like, yeah, I'm okay with that. And I'll close that off.
Now, do you make your own clay body?
No, I don't. The place I'm at right now, it doesn't really have the space for a clay mixing room. Otherwise, I would totally be probably mixing up my Cone 10 clay body, because it was like a nice dark orange clay body that I really liked. And I probably would have stayed with Cone 10. But then again, I did want to see what I could do with terracotta.
Well, during the show, I remember, I loved your comment, because I really related to this. Well, you like the way things look like now, if there's like leather or greenware state, you know, and
well, that's why I don't...
terracotta tends to be like that, you know, it's just...
That terracotta and that brown clay body.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what's in that clay body. It's actually just Laguna's 202 or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what number it is. That one actually is, if you take a leather hard piece, it looks the exact same when it's fired. It's incredible.
Seems to be more of like a marble effect. Mixing the two clay and just firing it, just clear coating it.
I haven't tried that either.
I never have either. I thought I would have this rifle not so long ago.
Yeah, I haven't, for as long as I've been doing it, I really don't, my pots are pretty straightforward.
It's a beautiful form, but you don't really need that.
Yeah, I mean, I like the decoration part, and I think if I would do something where I was marbleizing and stuff like that, I'd actually lose a lot with the final shaping and stuff like that. Quite have that really nice form going on in it. So by pushing that in, I can come back in with my rib. And change that form a little bit, so it's a little bit more sort of curvy instead of so like rigid. And then again, when I come in and trim that out, it'll actually go in even more. One of the things is I used to hate trimming, and I do a lot of trimming on the sides of pieces because I do throw them a little bit thicker. That's how I can kind of get away with getting the forms that I want to have in the final piece. Whereas if I throw it too thin, I'm kind of like, well, I'm kind of stuck with it, and I don't like that. So I will come in. Oftentimes, I'll actually come in once I get the foot down, depending on how much clay I have. And I'll actually do some pre-trimming. So I'll just come in and so if I know there's a lot of clay in there, I can totally just get rid of some of it, so then save me some trimming later on. The other thing is I can actually push the form around a little bit when I'm trimming this way. Like if I'm coming down lower, because I'm trimming it so wet, I'm actually going to push that clay in a bit, which again kind of helps with my form.
So you're more forming than trimming, or a little of both?
A little bit of both. I mean, I'm probably pulling off half a pound of clay at this point. But you have to be careful because when you start trimming away wet clay, You can't get too aggressive, otherwise you're going to tear the whole thing off and have to start all over again. And I actually learned that from, I went to a workshop. Have you guys ever been down to North Carolina Potter's workshop, or Potter's conference? If you guys ever get the chance, probably the best pottery workshop in the country. I would say better than in Sika. You don't see as much pots, but you get a group of about probably 150 potters, and it's down in North Carolina, and just right next door is Seagrove, and in Seagrove there's something like 150 potters within a 30-mile radius. It's something ridiculous. So there's a lot of like traditional pots, contemporary pots, and everything that you can possibly imagine down there. Plus you usually get a couple big names down there. But the one I went to was it was with Phil Rogers, and Phil was the guy that I started seeing how he would trim really, really wet. And so he'd have basically his shape all done except for the inside of the foot. And I was like, huh, that's brilliant, because then you don't have to trim hardly at all. And so that was one of the perks, and I'm like, I like that, I'm going to use it. So that's where I started wet trimming as much as I do. Can you have that wire tool, please? Any questions so far? You guys falling asleep already?
Do you cut it on the bat so that it doesn't stick to the bat?
Sometimes.
I've had problems with that.
Depending on what I'm throwing, just so I can get them off. Like bottles and stuff like that, I'll get those off. Mugs I usually leave on bats, just because I usually get warping in the rims. So it just depends on what the object is. Like something like the alabastron jar, you really can't get that off until it's dried up a good bit. Something like this, I actually leave attached to the bat until I'm ready to trim it. Just because if not, I can actually, if I add like more sections on or something like that, I can pull it off the bat, which would kind of make me mad. So it just depends on what I'm making. Teacups, jars, smaller things, I usually pull off right away. Oh, let's see. We'll add a section onto this big guy. We'll see if I can get one to stay on it right now. So right now what I'm doing is I'm just kind of feeling the rim of this thing. On the big jars, timing is incredibly important, because too much clay, gravity comes in, it's going to drop it down really quick. The other part is because it is on a bat that doesn't really absorb much water out of it, the bottom foot is always really, really wet, so you have to kind of do checks and balances. So what I generally do is I'll usually throw up to about 10-12 inches for the first one. Which is about 15 pounds, 12 to 15 pounds of clay. The second section is only about 6 pounds of clay, 6 to 8 pounds of clay. And the reason why is because that'll actually let this rim solidify to the point where I can add the next section on. But since I know this is still wet, I'm not going to have as much torque with a smaller amount of clay. And so if you do a smaller ring on the second one, you're generally going to have better success with it not tipping over and falling down on you. So it's one of those things that makes a good bit of difference. And right now I'm kind of feeling it.